In today's training, I'm going to give you kind of a behind the scenes look at a monthly compliance review. So, I wanted to show you exactly the process that I take to check on individual participants to see if they're enrolled, to see if they're complete, or if they're in transition. So, let's get started. On your screen, you are going to see our test provider that we use here internally. And I've just pulled up the complete and in transition participants. And the reason that I've done that is those complete and in transition, those are the individuals who've gone through that whole pre-apprentice life cycle. So that's going to give us a good look at kind of each metric. So enrollment, completion, and then transition. So the very first step that I take with our complete and in transition is downloading all of the data on those individuals from the system. So in this instance, I'm just going to download the complete and in transition for our test provider. But on a monthly basis, I go in and I download completes for every single grantee, completed in transition for every single grantee as well. So what I'll do is I choose the export feature and then I choose every single one of these fields because that gives me a good aerial view of what I need to be looking at in the system, what I might see in the system. And it starts to give me kind of larger sweeps of being able to say different information is entered. So once I've selected all of these, I go ahead and I choose export. And then we get our export that comes up. So you can see these are our four complete and in transitions. And just by scrolling through, I can see we have all of this information in here, right? We have their address, their gender, their zip code. That automatically, that data being there automatically tells me that an application is in the system, right? Because all of that information is pulled from the application. So before I even look at the profile, I know this person at least has an application. And I can also tell if they meet basic eligibility, right? We're looking at, the highest level of education. We have their birth date. We have, where they live. So these are things that off the bat I can tell, yes, this person's eligible to be in the program. Yes, they have an application. So now I start to scroll through and you can see we have, our follow-up flag, our enrollment flag, our absences flag. Now, I've already gone through this and I've highlighted anywhere that it says attention, I highlight it in yellow. Anywhere that it says red flag, I highlight it as a red flag. I do this personally because it helps me be able to see information quickly. At any given time during a monthly compliance review, I'm going through anywhere from 150 to 200 profiles. So I need to kind of make this pretty easy for me to accessibly see, where are we seeing red flags. So you can see here, whoops, let me get back over. You can see here we have our red flags, our attention. And again, I do this because it helps me see it. You know, there's no other reason. This doesn't populate with this highlight from the system. This is something that I've done. But then I can see, we're missing wraparound service assessments. We're missing first career, last career assessments for two of our individuals. And then as we scroll over, you can see, we're missing interview scores for them. We don't have a answer to this question. How did you hear about the program? Very likely that means there's not a pre-screen assessment there because that's where that question is from. But then when we scroll to the right, we can see all of them are planning to go to a DLL registered apprenticeship program. We have one that's enrolled, two that have applied, and one that's planning to apply. And we have two carpenters, right? So it automatically kind of gives us that information. And so that tells me, this is likely, for 3 out of 4 of these, this is likely going to be a primary transition as long as they have that verification documentation in. So once I look at that, I actually start digging into the individual profiles of these people. So I'm going to go through the profile that I set up here, and the first thing I do is I refresh the status. And I do this because I want to have the most up-to-date information. So the system, if you change anything within that workday, the system will not automatically update. And the reason for that is because if it was automatically updating for every single profile, it would drastically slow down the system. So if you're in the system and you're actively changing things, just make sure to refresh the status on this page because it's going to give you the most up-to-date information. So right off the bat, I see there's an attention flag on post-assessment flags. There's a red flag on our communication skills course. And then there's a yellow flag on our transition services, but everything else looks pretty good. So now let's go to intake. So here I'm looking for, our pre-screen assessment. Yep, that was completed. We can see our application is here. They were selected for an interview. Jack and Arnold interviewed them, getting a score of 36. Then we have our interview sheet uploaded. We have our signed agreement uploaded. He's been enrolled in the system in cohort 1 here. He's got this wraparound service assessment, and then he has his first career assessment. So all of that off the bat tells me this individual has been properly enrolled. So if we were to stop right now, if Tiger was at just enrolled status, I would say, yes, he is enrolled. Now, Tiger's not at just enrolled, right? So he's completed in transition. So next I need to go ahead and I need to check for completeness of instruction. So I'm going to go to training and services. And right off the bat, I can see in this box, he only has 2 earned credentials. So that tells me that there is a missing credential somewhere, right? Because the Illinois Works program requires OSHA, first aid CPR, and then NCCR or NAV2. So off the bat, we're going to have 3 credentials. So 1 is missing. So I'll get to kind of checking that individually, but the way to see which one is missing, we can also use this export file. So if we come back here, we can see these columns, so AH through AJ, tell us about those credentials. And it looks like he has his OSHA, he's got his NCCR, but he's missing his first aid CPR. So we know right off the bat, that's not going to be in the system for him. And this kind of confirms it. So first we're going to go here to training services, and we can see that all of these services are successfully complete. Oh, now we get to module 7, communications started and opened. So that's very likely, if you remember, we had that flag on our communication skills. That's very likely where this flag is coming from because it's not marked as successful completion and we're past that completion date. So the system will mark that if they say, hey, you're past your completion date, but this is not, this is still open, what's going on? It's going to flag it for you. So let's move on to this kind of next step here where I can show you how I actually go through and check each of these. So first, I'll go through and I'll hit the control button, hold that down, and I open each of these modules. Okay. So the reason that I do this is it just makes things a little bit easier to be able to see all of the information per module. So here are the things that I'm looking for in these modules: attendance, post-assessment scores, and then an earned credential if that's appropriate for that service. So again, first aid CPR, OSHA, or NCCR/NAB2. Those are the only ones that I'm looking for those credentials on. So this orientation, I wouldn't be looking for a credential, but I would be looking for attendance that meets our 80% threshold for that module, and then post assessments that meets that 70% threshold. So you can see everything is completed in here. Let's get over to attendance. All right, so weekly hours are 4. They have 4 hours. Perfect, 100% attendance. Now we go to post assessments. They got 100% on the orientation post assessment. That's passing, right? So I go through and I do this for each of them. And you can see for basic safety now, we have 6 hours planned per week. right? That's what this means. Number of hours planned, weekly hours, right? Planned weekly hours. So I'm looking for 6 hours to be here and 6 hours to be here, but we only have 3 hours. So that's very likely why we might be having, we might get a attendance flag. We might have issues around like our attendance not showing, not being accurately represented. So it's just checking those items. It could be, right, and I've seen this, is that sometimes the total hours get put in here instead of weekly hours. So really, perhaps this module is only 6 hours long and really it's just missing the 3 from this week. But either way, there's something that's not quite right here, so it's something to take a look at. But we go to our post assessment, we see that they passed their post assessment. We go here to our construction math, we have 10 hours, our post assessment is passing. Introduction to hand tools, we have our post assessment. So same with power tools. Now we're in our job practicum. We can see we have, this is our practicum provider, and see that was successfully completed. The goal was to do 10 hours each week. Oh, but it looks like there's 0 hours in the system. Okay, again, this is where you're gonna see very likely some sort of attendance flag, some sort of issue that pops up. So this is something to know, go back and just enter those hours as appropriate. Now we get into our construction drawings, which is great. Attendance is there, post assessments are there. Same with communication skills, post assessments there as well. So now we know actually that service is complete. So even though it was still marked as started and open, we know that this service was successfully completed. They attended and they did their post assessment, passed it with flying colors. So that was just, a slight oversight. So something to kind of keep in mind. So now we get to employability. Again, we're missing attendance here. No post assessment for the employability. Attendance, we have our material handlings, we have our post assessment. So now we get into OSHA. So we have our 10 hours, perfect. We have our post assessment score. We have our earned credential, perfect. Now we're into first aid CPR. Again, we have our 10 hours, we have our post assessment, but remember, we don't have that credential. So this is something that I would, again, I'm going to note on the compliance review. Hey, missing first aid CPR credentials. Check, attendance. Make sure these things are up to date. Now, we have our first aid CPR, we have our OSHA, but we also know that we had that second credential, right? We had our OSHA and then we also had our NCCR. So my suggestion to everyone is to place your NCCR or your NAB2 certificate on the final module that earns them that credential. So if you put in NCCR or NAB2 as a separate training service, the system is going to be looking for attendance. They're going to be looking for post assessment scores. It's going to be looking for all of those things because the system thinks this is now a new training. The system doesn't know that all of these modules made up the training that you are now giving that certificate to. So you could end up with red flags on attendance, red flags on post assessments, only because the system's looking for attendance in that. So the suggestion here is place that credential, this NCCR or your NAB2 credential, on the final training module that earns them that certificate. So we have that here. So now we've gone through, we've checked attendance, we've checked post assessments. Now for this individual, there are kind of some attendance pieces missing, some post assessment pieces missing, but by and large, I can tell that this person was in class. These are possibly just data errors, data oversights. So again, this is where on your report you might get a statement that says, make sure all of your attendance is in, make sure all of your first, your credentials are in, make sure all of your post assessments are in. Sometimes I'll even go to the point of saying, hey, this person is missing this module. This person is missing attendance on this piece. I'm also always happy to supply kind of this data sheet to you if you need that. But this is stuff that is pretty easy to check if you just use that method of hitting and holding control and opening all of these modules. You can kind of whip through them pretty quickly. That's how I get through them. So for example, for the August compliance review, I checked 174 profiles in the matter of 3 days. And that was, obviously not the only task I was working on. So it is possible to get through these pretty quickly and check them. And so I encourage you to use that method because that's the method that I've used to get through these quickly and just check that information. So next you can see uploads here. So now because, as you remember, Tiger is both complete and in transition, I'm going to be looking for his certificates, and I also would be looking for any sort of information about his transition. So did he apply? Is he enrolled? Do we have verification of that? So in the system here, we can see he has his first aid CPR, he has his NCCR, and he has his OSHA. Now, if you remember, his first aid CPR credential was not added, but his certificate is. And so in that instance, if I have this verification, I can say, okay, now I know that that adding of that credential was just an oversight. He did earn his first aid, he did earn his NCCR, he did earn his OSHA. But what's missing here? His transition document. So there's no verification that he has transitioned to any registered apprenticeship program. So it could be that they're just waiting on verification. That's fine. But in that instance, what I would do for this profile is count the completion and hold off on the transition until that transition document is provided. So we can go to the program completion and follow-up tab for him and see what is likely going on. So he's planning to enter a deal or register apprenticeship. Oh, he applied. Okay. So very likely they're waiting on proof of that application. Once they get it, they'll go ahead and upload it in this primary transition document field here. We can also view his baseline. So this is when you fill out this completion status and answer questions about their transition path. This baseline will show you what was entered most recently. So for him, we're going to be looking for an application, documentation, application from the carpenters, right? That's what this tells me. It's currently not employed. Good to know. So now we know what I'm going to be looking for the next time I come back and check this transition. So that is just kind of a quick walkthrough of kind of how I check those. If there are ever any questions about walking through this process, if you need the data or you just want the data along with your compliance review, feel free to ask for it. I'm happy to provide that to you so that you kind of know what I'm seeing on my end. I often, as I go through those training services, will also record which services are missing attendance, which services are missing post assessments. That allows a little bit more narrowing of what needs to be addressed. So I really encourage all of you as you're verifying your data to do a similar thing. So go through, download your export sheet, get all of that good information about your participants, and then create new columns that say, attendance, post assessments, transition documents, certification documents, and go through those profiles, open up all of those training modules and say, okay, we're missing attendance on module 1, module 3, and a post assessment on module 4. And then work through those, right? And a good tip on that is, especially for completions and completions and then completions and transitions, the goal is to have the most complete profiles. So oftentimes I see people go through and they do all of the OSHAs and all of the first aids for all of their participants. Well, now you have, 10 participants who are 20% done, as opposed to 3 participants who are 95% done. I can count those 3 participants who are 90% done. I can't count the 10 who are 20% done. So really think through strategically how you're getting these completed to make sure that you're meeting those metrics and kind of going forward with your progress rating, because the more complete an individual profile is, the more likely it is that I can go ahead and then count that completion, because I'm able to verify that completion based on the information in the system. So again, these are just kind of some tips that I've found as I've been checking these, as I've been talking with grantees. Please stay in touch if you have questions. Happy to sit down with you one-on-one, happy to trade emails, phone calls, whatever will help you be successful in this aspect of the program.